All right, so look, you don't need to become someone new. You just need to stop reinforcing an old version of yourself. Every time you say, I am or I can't, you're casting a vote for a version of you. The question is that the version that you want to keep becoming? Welcome to the Personal Mastery and Growth Podcast, where we explore the keys to unlocking your full potential and living your best life. I'm your host, Jose Johnson. Whether you're looking to make a breakthrough, overcome a challenge, or simply live with greater clarity, joy, and purpose, you'll find the tools and inspirations you need right here. So let's start your journey towards personal mastery and growth right now. Welcome back to the Personal Mastery and Growth Podcast, your go-to resource for practical tips, insightful research, and inspiring stories to help you unlock your full potential. I'm your host, Jose Johnson, and I'm an expert in the fields of mindfulness, mindset, and peak performance, and I am so excited to have you here with me today. And in today's episode, we're continuing our three-part series on the power of language. And in this episode, we're going a little bit deeper. Last week, we talked about the language of doing, how phrases like I have to, I need to, and I should create resistance and drain your energy. But today, we're shifting from how you talk about what you do to who you believe you are. Now, over these three episodes, we're exploring something most people never stop to examine: the language that you use every day, the words you attach to your task, the words you attach to yourself, the words that you attach to what's happening around you. And because words don't just describe your experience, they actually shape it. And today we're focusing on two of the most powerful and dangerous phrases that you can use: I am and I can't. So let me ask you a question. How often do you say things like, I am bad with money, I am not disciplined, I am always stressed, I am terrible with names, I can't stay consistent, I can't do that? All right? Now, here's the tricky part. Most people say these things casually, like they're just describing reality. But your brain doesn't hear them as observation. It hears them as instructions. I am and I can't are not just sentences. They are commands. And your brain responds with, got it, I'll make that true. Now, as we've talked about in previous episodes, the brain is a prediction machine. And one of the questions it is constantly trying to answer is, what kind of a person am I? Because once it answers that question, it can conserve energy. If you're not a morning person, the brain doesn't need to debate about waking up early. If you're bad with money, the brain doesn't need to learn a new bookkeeping system. If you can't stay consistent, the brain doesn't need to push through resistance. Identity reduces decision fatigue. But here's the catch. The brain prefers consistency over improvement, even if the consistency is limiting. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. Once you believe something about yourself, your brain scans for evidence to support it. You forget the times that you were disciplined, and you highlight the times that you weren't. You build a case, and before you know it, you're living inside a story you keep proving to be true. All right, so let's zoom in on two very small words: I am. Because these might be the most powerful and most underestimated words in your vocabulary. When you say I am, you're not just describing yourself, you're defining yourself. And your brain takes that very seriously. So let's start with a simple distinction. There's a big difference between describing a moment and defining an identity. I missed a workout. That's a description. I am lazy. That's a definition. I forgot their name. That's a description. I'm terrible with names. That's a definition. I struggled with that presentation. Description. I'm bad at public speaking. Definition. Hey, one is temporary. The other, well, it feels permanent. And your brain responds very differently to each. See, the brain is always looking for efficiency. It's trying to conserve energy. So instead of evaluating every situation from scratch, it creates shortcuts. And identity is one of the most powerful shortcuts it has. If your brain believes you're not a morning person, it doesn't need to debate whether to wake up early. Case closed. If it believes I'm bad with money, it doesn't need to learn budgeting systems. Why bother? That's not who we are. Identity reduces decision making. But here's the trade off it also reduces possibility. I am statements stick, they act like mental glue. Once something attaches to identity, it becomes harder to change because now you're not just changing behavior, you're challenging who you believe you are. And the brain does not love that. Even if the identity is limiting, it's familiar, and familiar feels safe. So the brain protects it. Now, if you layer in confirmation bias, once you say, I am not disciplined, your brain starts scanning for proof. And it's very good at finding it. You skip one workout, yep, see, told you so. You procrastinate on one task, yep, there it is again. Meanwhile, all the times you were disciplined, ignored, discounted, forgotten. It's like your brain becomes a lawyer, arguing a case against your potential. And it's only presenting evidence that supports the story that you gave it. Let's be honest. We've all done this. Said something like, I'm terrible at remembering names. Then someone introduces themselves, and you forget their name 10 seconds later. And your brain goes, excellent consistency. I'm proud of you. It's like you accidentally training for a championship in a thing you don't want. Gold medal in living up to your limitations. Now, let's take a closer look at one of the most limiting and most socially acceptable phrases. I can't. I can't speak up. I can't change. I can't stay consistent. I can't do that. Now, on the surface, it sounds like a statement of ability, but most of the time, it's not. I can't is rarely about capability. It is about protection. Remember, your brain is wired for one primary job to keep you safe. Not successful, not fulfilled, not optimized, safe. And I can't is one of its favorite shortcuts because it shuts down things immediately. No debate, no discomfort, no risk. Conversation over. So let's look at what I can't really means. And we'll start by translating a few common ones. I can't speak up at meetings. Well, that probably means that I don't feel safe being judged. I can't start that business. Well, it means maybe I'm afraid of failing publicly. I can't stay consistent. That means I don't trust myself to follow through yet. I can't have that conversation. That probably means I'm uncomfortable with conflict. Now, notice what just happened. We didn't make the problem bigger. We just made it more accurate. And accuracy creates options. I can't creates walls. So here's the tricky part. I can't works. It's efficient. It saves energy. It prevents discomfort. And your brain loves all those things. Right? Just think about it like this. I can't is like hitting the emergency brake. You stop immediately, no crash, but also no forward motion. The problem with I can't is that you'll never get where you're trying to go because growth requires movement, and movement requires tolerance for discomfort. All right, look, we've all used I can't in some creative ways. I can't go to the gym today. Well, the translation is, well, I can, but I just don't feel like negotiating with myself right now. I can't eat healthy. Translation, I can, but pizza's making a very strong argument. And listen, no judgment. Pizza is persuasive, But the point is this: a lot of what we label as inability is actually preference, discomfort, or lack of readiness. And when we call it inability, we remove responsibility. When you repeatedly use I can't, two things happen. First, you stop exploring solutions because the brain thinks the door's closed. No need to look for strategies, no need to build skills, no need to experiment. Case closed. And two, you reinforce a fixed identity. I can't feeds directly into I am. I can't stay consistent becomes I am inconsistent. And now we move from behavior to identity. And identity is much harder to change. Now, look, we're not going to jump from I can't to I can do anything. Let's stay grounded. Instead of I can't do this, try I haven't figured this out yet, or I'm not comfortable with this yet, or I'm learning how to do this. Remember, that one word, yet, is powerful. It keeps the door open, and open doors invite action. Closed doors do not. I can't feels final, but most of the time it's just fear in a very convincing disguise. And once you see that, you can start having a different conversation with yourself. All right, so now let's connect everything we've talked about so far, because this is where things really start to click. And this is where a lot of people go, oh, that's what's been happening. All right, so there's a loop that runs in the background. And here's the pattern. You say something like, I am bad at this. That's the starting point. Now your brain goes, got it. That's who we are. So what happens next? You either avoid the situation, you approach it with low confidence, or you give minimal effort. Not consciously, just automatically, because your identity is already set. Then comes the evidence. Now, let's say you try, but you hesitate. You overthink. You don't perform your best. And the result? Not great. And your brain says, see, I told you. Now you've got evidence. And evidence, well, that strengthens the belief. Then the loop tightens. The next opportunity that comes up, you're even more hesitant because now it's not just a thought, it's a proven pattern. And the loop looks like this. Identity leads to your behavior leads to results, and the results reinforce your identity. And that happens over and over again. So just think about your identity like a thermometer. If it's set to 68 degrees, you can heat the room up to 75 for a little while. Maybe you're motivated. Maybe you had a good week. Maybe you listened to a great podcast like this one. But eventually, the system pulls you back to 68. Not because you failed, but because the system's doing its job, maintaining the set point. So if your identity is, I am inconsistent, you might have a productive week, but eventually your behavior drifts back to match your identity. Now, this is important to understand. This is not a character flaw. This is efficiency. The brain builds patterns to conserve energy. If it had to reevaluate everything from scratch every day, you'd be exhausted by breakfast. So it creates shortcuts. And identity is one of those shortcuts. The problem is, some of those shortcuts, they're a little outdated. So let's say someone says, I'm not good at public speaking. So they avoid speaking opportunities, or they do them reluctantly. They rush, they tighten up, they don't fully engage. The result, well, a mediocre performance at best. And now they say, see, I knew it. But what they don't see is the performance wasn't caused by lack of ability. It was influenced by the identity that they carried into the moment. All right, so here's the important truth. This loop does not require accuracy. It requires repetition. You can repeat something inaccurate long enough, and it will eventually start to feel like fact. And that's how limiting beliefs form, not from one moment, but from repeated interpretation of moments. But here's a little perspective shift for you. You're not your patterns. You're just the one practicing them. And what you practice, you get better at, including your limitations. So if you've been practicing, I can't and I'm not, I always struggle with, you've been training that identity. Very effectively, by the way. But the good news, you can train something different. The identity loop is always running. The question is it reinforcing limitation or supporting growth? Because once you understand the loop, you don't just work harder, you work smarter at the level that actually creates change. Now, let's address something very important. You've probably heard just say positive affirmations like, I'm amazing, I'm unstoppable. Well, sometimes that works, but often it doesn't. Why? Because your brain checks for evidence. If the statement feels too far from your current reality, the brain rejects it. Research shows that affirmations can actually backfire when they create too much internal contradiction. So the solution isn't to jump from I'm terrible with money to I'm a financial genius. That's too big of a leap. Your brain will be like, nice try. So instead of using language that creates a rigid identity, we should use words that express a flexible identity, language that allows for growth. Instead of, I am bad at this, try, I am learning this. Instead of, I can't do that, try, I haven't done that yet. Instead of, that's just who I am, try, that's who I've practiced being. See the difference? You're not lying. You're just leaving room. And room is where growth happens. Now, this aligns directly with Carol Dweck's research on the growth mindset. When abilities are seen as developable, effort increases, persistence improves, and performance naturally follows. And language is the gateway to that mindset. Hey there, feeling stuck? Spinning your wheels? Are you ready for a breakthrough? Well, then you need to hear this because I've got something that will supercharge your growth this year, and it's called the Mindset Makeover. Now, it's my new book and course that are designed to help you upgrade the mental software that drives your success. And inside, you're going to discover the mindsets that shape every decision, every habit, and every result. And you'll learn the science-backed tools to rewire your thinking for clarity, confidence, and unstoppable momentum. So whether you're aiming higher, trying to break free from old patterns, or finally stepping into that version of yourself that you know that you're capable of becoming, well, this is your launch pad. So don't wait. Head over to josejohnson.com/mindset to grab the book, join the course, or get both together. Again, that's josejohnson.com/mindset. And remember, it is what it is, but it becomes what you make it. And with the Mindset Makeover, you can make it something extraordinary. All right, now let's take everything we've talked about and turn it into something you can actually use. Because insight is great, but transformation comes from repetition. So this is your identity reset practice. And it's a simple, practical way to start rewriting how you talk about yourself. And remember, you're not trying to become a different person overnight. You're just updating the language that's shaping the person you're becoming. So, step one, catch the phrase. This is where it all starts. You cannot change language you don't notice. So for the next 24 to 48 hours, your only job is awareness. Listen for I am, I can't. And not just the big ones, the small, casual ones. I am terrible at directions. I can't focus today. I'm just not good at this. Because those are the ones that sneak in unnoticed. Think of this like becoming a detective of your own internal dialogue. No judgment, no correction yet, just awareness. And here's a helpful tip. If you want to accelerate this, say it out loud when you catch it. There's something powerful about hearing your own words externally. Sometimes you'll hear yourself say something and immediately think, yeah, that might not be helping. That moment of awareness, that's the doorway to change. Now, step two, question the statement. Now that you've caught the phrase, we don't automatically replace it, we question it. Ask yourself, is this actually true, or is this something I've practiced saying? Now, that's a powerful distinction because most identity statements are not facts, they're summaries, and often they're outdated summaries. For example, I'm bad at public speaking. Is that a fact? Or is it based on a few uncomfortable experiences? I can't stay consistent. Is that always true? Or have there been times when you were consistent? Now, this step matters because questioning creates space, and space breaks automatic responses. And without this step, you're just swapping words. With this step, you're shifting belief. Step three, translate, don't inflate. All right, so now we reframe. And here's where most people go wrong. They try to jump from, I'm terrible at this, to, I am amazing at this. And your brain goes, absolutely not, and shuts the whole thing down. So instead of inflating the statement, we translate it into something accurate and flexible. So, for example, I'm bad at this can become, this is something I'm learning. I can't stay consistent can become, consistency is a skill that I'm building. I'm not confident. Well, we can change that to, I'm working on building confidence. I can't do that. Well, that translates to, I haven't done that yet. And the word yet is doing a lot of heavy lifting because it keeps the door open, and open doors create our possibility. So, why does this work? Well, when you use rigid identity language, your brain locks into a fixed pattern. No need to adapt, no need to explore. But when you use flexible language, the brain stays engaged. It sees the situation as dynamic, and dynamic systems can change. Now, this ties directly into research on the growth mindset. When people believe abilities can be developed, they persist longer, recover from setbacks faster, and perform better over time. And that belief is often reinforced or weakened by language. Step number 4, reinforce through repetition. Now, here's the part most people underestimate. You don't change identity with one sentence. You change identity with repeated language. This is like going to the gym. You don't build strength with one rep. You build it with consistent reps over time. Same thing here. Every time you catch and reframe a statement, you're doing a rep. Now, will it feel natural right away? Heck no. It might feel awkward, it might feel forced, but that's normal because you're interrupting a pattern that's been running for years, maybe decades. Now, remember, you don't need to catch every statement. That's exhausting. So start with 10%. If you say, I can't 20 times a day, catch 2 of them. That's it. Small shift, consistently applied, and that will create real change. So let's consider another everyday example. Let's say you're about to start something new, and the thought comes up, I can't do this. Pause, translate it. Now it becomes, I haven't done this yet. Now what happens? Perhaps the emotional intensity drops. That means the door's open, and you're more likely to take action. Not because you forced yourself, but because you removed the mental block. Now, this is an important point. Language alone isn't magic. It creates the conditions for action. The action reinforces the new identity. So when you say, I'm learning to be consistent, follow it with one consistent action. Small, simple, repeatable. Because identity shifts when language and behavior align. All right, so look, you don't need to become someone new. You just need to stop reinforcing an old version of yourself. Every time you say, I am or I can't, you're casting a vote for a version of you. The question is that the version that you want to keep becoming? And here's the big takeaway. Task language shapes your energy. Identity language shapes your ceiling. If you change how you think about what you do, life gets lighter. If you change how you talk about who you are, life gets bigger. And when both shift, momentum becomes natural. Now look, you are not a fixed identity. You're a dynamic system. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on repeated thought and behavior. That's neuroplasticity. So every time you update your language, you're influencing your wiring. Not overnight, but over time. And over time is where everything meaningful happens. So pay attention to the words you use, because the most powerful conversation you have, the one that no one hears. And if this episode helped you to recognize how your identity language might be shaping your limits, please share it with someone who's been feeling stuck, doubting themselves, or struggling to move forward. And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so that you don't miss the next episode in our language miniseries. And always remember, it is what it is, but it becomes what you make it. So make it great. Thanks for tuning in. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you that the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional advice or treatment. While the content of this podcast is based on research and personal experience, everyone's situation is unique, and the advice given may not be applicable to all. Always consult a qualified professional before making significant changes in your life. The Personal Mastery and Growth podcast is recorded at the So Good Media Studios, located in the Candy Factory, a co-working space in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.